asking the question, are 32 districts too many for Santa Clara County? And this is a topic that has been brought to, well, actually been part of the conversation in Santa Clara County for many years now. In fact, the grand jury had put out a report in 2009-2010. And here at the foundation, we support public schools through our direct service programs, such as our Stepping Up to Algebra and Stepping Up to Science programs, and we also do it through our advocacy work as well, such as putting on these forums. My name is Manny Barbera. I'm the vice president here, and we're really happy to have the opportunity to bring this topic out for discussion today. We're going to get started, and we want to really have as much time as possible for the conversation that's going to take place. We have a couple of keynotes, one main keynote, and then some information that will be presented. And to introduce our main keynote speaker for today, I'd like to introduce the CEO for the community, for the Silicon Valley Education Foundation, Mohammed Chaki. Mohammed.
Thank you all for coming out. First of all, I'd like to ask all the school board members to please stand up. Give them a round of applause. We want to thank you for your service in Santa Clara County and beyond. We know it's at times a thankless job, and we have some other former elected officials in the room, including our former mayor, Ron Gonzalez, is in the room as well. Give Ron a hand. You know, at Silicon Valley Education Foundation, we're really focused on elevating achievement through innovation. Innovation with technology, innovation through policy. This is a conversation that for the past 3 to 4 years, whenever I approach a business person, we've been having the conversation, why? A lot of business folks have been asking why 31, 32, or 33, depending on how you do the math in the school districts. And we've been meaning to have this conversation because we believe an informed community will be a more engaged community. Although we're not taking a hardline position on this, it's about time we have the conversation to challenge our thinking, one way or the other. And although Silicon Valley Community Foundation provided the lunch, we made sure there weren't any tomatoes in there. So you can't throw any tomatoes on either side of the equation that you fall on. Come on, that was a decent joke, come on. Thank you, Gina. Now I get to introduce Dr. Emmett Carson, and I'm only going to say nice things about him because he's agreed to babysit my twins this Friday night. You know, Dr. Carson, if you don't know him, is the CEO of the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, but also a nationally recognized figure in philanthropy with his work at the Minneapolis Foundation, in DC, at the Ford Foundation, and various other places. He knows a little bit about mergers. He merged the Community Foundation of Silicon Valley and the Peninsula Foundation, a $2 billion merger of two entities, which was very complex, and over the past 5 years has been very successful at it. So he knows a little bit about all the challenges of mergers as well, so we wanted him to lead off the conversation. And over his 5 years being there, they've given out over $200 million into the community. He brought his checkbook, and his staff is here. Gina's here, who gives to education. She brought a checkbook, so talk to her afterwards if you haven't gotten enough money from them. But in all honesty, Emmett and his wife Jackie have become pillars in our community and have been visiting school districts. It's not academic for him. He's actually gone out and seen lots of school districts, including we visited a couple of school districts together. So it's my honor to introduce Dr. Emmett Carson.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. This started out because Manny and Muhammad called me up and they said, we just want to get a few people together to discuss our 32 districts too many. Would you sort of share some ideas with them? And I said, sure. And lo and behold, how many are in the room? So just a few people. So it's always a good sign first when you throw a party and people come. So thank you for coming. Let me say a couple of things about myself. I'm a scholar first and foremost. I see myself as an educator. So I care about the practice of education. I spent most of my life learning my discipline. I've had opportunities to teach. I am who I am because there were teachers in my life. My daughter went to public school throughout her elementary and high school training. She graduated from Lincoln High School here when we moved here. So I come to you as both a product of public schools in Chicago, having dedicated myself to being an educator and having had a commitment to put my own daughter through public school education in Minnesota and here. So just so we're all clear on where I come from and my commitment to public education. You may not like what I like to do with public education. It has to be determined. But don't question my commitment to public education. So, my goal is not to give you a solution today. Some of you are going to want to talk about the solution. You may have that answer. I don't have that answer today. Right? I'm not here to tell you it ought to be one district. For those of you who already say it can't be one district because LA doesn't work, I'm not here to tell you that. I'm here to tell you that the king of 32 school districts has no clothes. And just because I say it has no clothes, if I can show you that it has no clothes, doesn't make me a tailor. That's a different job. I'm here, somebody's frying on. You know, there's an old story about saying the king has on no clothes. The fact that I say the king has on no clothes, I'm not a tailor. Right? So I can make the observation that 32 districts don't work. That does not put on me the obligation to tell you how to fix it. That's our joint obligation. I don't hold that burden. Right? So I want to be clear. I'm not here today to convince you of the system that works. I'm here today to tell you why I think that the system we have is failing. Right? And the analogy that I'll start off with using is I look at growing kids in the process of education like planting crops. Teachers are the farmers, the kids are the seeds, but it takes soil. It takes water. It takes sunlight. The districts, to me, represent the soil. Right? They're the soil in which we put these kids. You have the teachers, and then you have sunshine, you have the temperature, and you have the water. And yes, you can have some seeds that can be high quality, some seeds that aren't where you want them to be. You have some great farmers and teachers. You have some farmers that aren't that good, right? Sometimes the weather conditions are what you want, sometimes they're not. But increasingly, I have come to believe that the soil, the 32 districts in which we're trying to plant these seeds, have too much sand and too many rocks. And it just makes it too hard. It just makes it too hard. And somebody said, well, you're right. That alone isn't all of the problem. I'm not saying it's all of the problem. I'm saying it makes trying to make it better too hard. So let me give you 7 reasons that I think that the system we have makes it too hard. And that we ought to be able to say we can do better than what we have. And it's just like a doctor giving a diagnosis. First you got to accept the diagnosis, and then you say, well, what are our options to make it better? Today's discussion is to see if we can come to a meeting of the minds about the diagnosis. It's not the discussion to try to say, okay, what set of treatments are the best treatments? But can we say that this system, we can do better by our kids? So, my staff was worried that I get going sometimes and they want to keep me to notes. Thank you, Gina. Where's Gina at? Raise your hand. If you want a grant, talk to Gina. Raise your hand. Okay. The first reason to me that this system isn't working is we're not getting the results that any of us should be proud of. Quite frankly, the results are abysmal for all of our kids. And I want to be clear about this, because sometimes I've spoken to people about this and we say, well, we ought to do this because of the achievement gap. Yeah, that's one reason. But when you actually look at the numbers, the system that we have, the way it's working, is failing all of our kids. So let's look at data, the most recent data for Santa Clara County from the school year 2009-2010 from the Department of Education, California Department of Education. This is in Santa Clara County, where 1 out of 6 high school students drop out. It's just right off the top, over the 4-year matriculation, 1 out of 6 drops out. For the 09-10 school year, there was a total 12th grade enrollment of 20,596 kids. Of that number, only 16,833 graduated. Of the 12th grade students, just 12th grade students who entered 12th grade, 18% did not graduate. More than half, 51% of all 12th grade students, graduates, these are kids who graduated, did not meet UC CSU requirements. More than half of the graduates didn't meet the standard. 3/4, 75% of all Hispanic graduates did not meet UC CSU requirements. More than 2/3, 68% of African American 12th grade graduates did not meet the standards. And 42% of all white graduates did not meet the UC CSU requirements. That's abysmal. And I think anyone who wants to say, boy, this is the system, this is the way to do it, this is making it work, you got to explain those outcomes. You got to say how you can say that's the best we can do for our kids. And I just don't think we can. If this is the best way to get there, this is the best result we can expect, we failed. Right? That's just point number one. The results don't defend what we have for any of the kids. And it's unacceptable, and they can't speak for themselves. We own the system. Second point. It is hard to create accountability for outcomes. It's almost impossible. It's impossible because you don't know who's responsible. Right? If you think of a production line, you can't have somebody say, well, I'll take them from kindergarten to 8th grade, and we've got our own plan, and then we're going to feed that into another system that says, well, we take them from 9th to 12th grade, but you didn't do X, Y, Z with them, so now don't hold me accountable. And you didn't tell us that's what you wanted, don't hold us accountable. And so we have a system where we're constantly doing, like, if they would only do this, and if they would only do that, nobody's accountable. It's outrageous. Right? No one would produce it that way. No one would say, somebody would say, look, we need to take this kid from this point to that point and control the means of production. We wouldn't segment it off and give it entirely to you. You know, I was at home for the holidays, and my wife, my daughter, and my mother-in-law were in the kitchen cooking. And I came in with my advice, and they said, we don't need another cook in the kitchen. Too many cooks in the kitchen. Too many cooks trying to do their own thing. It does not work. Of those 32 school districts, there are 169 board members. Just board members. It's not counting the county, that's not counting administrators, superintendents. It's 169 decision makers. If I had a magic bullet to solve reading and math, I've got to get 169 people to understand it, think about it, process it, and get it through. That's the best system we can have for our kids. It's outrageous. It's just outrageous. Duplication and lowering of expenses, right? We had the grand jury report. I know it's tough, trust me, I know that's hard. I've had to do it. I had to merge two institutions. Yes, that means fewer people. Yes, that means figuring out resources. But do we really think in this environment that suddenly a lot more money is about to flow into education? Or do we have an obligation to be good stewards of every dollar we have? I don't know if this current system is the most effective and efficient with the use of the resources that we have, the declining resource that we're going to have. And that alone could drive some different thinking about what kinds of combinations we should have. I work with the nonprofit community. That's where we interface. We work with some school districts, but I work with the nonprofit community. How many nonprofit leaders are in the room? Raise your hand high. Talk to these individuals about how hard it is to work in 32 different environments to try to help kids. I hear their complaints weekly. I've got a good idea, I've got results, I've got teachers or a principal who love to work with us. I can't get it through the Byzantine structure. I spend all of my time fighting with this system, and I've got results and outcomes. We've created something that makes innovation very difficult. I'm aware of one national foundation that wanted to come to town, wanted to do something huge in Silicon Valley, and once they understood the structure, said, no way. I'm not prepared to just use San Jose Unified by default. I want to work with all of the kids in a particular geography. We make it too hard. Make it too hard. Fewer districts mean that the qualifications and the talent pool of the administrators and the school board members would go up. Like it or not, as comfortable as you like to feel, sometimes we have school board members that in fact don't know very much about the school system. And so some of the things that are innovative, that are cutting edge, that rely on the most recent research and information, they go, boy, this is very different from when I went to school. I'm not comfortable in making a fast decision. I don't understand the rules. So we had fewer people having to make decisions. We could actually focus on people who had experience and understood the rules, would actually help our kids and the system work better. Right? You don't go to doctors who say, I read a book one time. Or, I ought to be a doctor because I've been a patient all of my life. That's sort of what we do with some school board members. Well, you went to school, your kid went to the school, you make a great board member. I think education we're going to require something higher going forward. I know that's a little comfortable for some. But I think that's what education is going to require to get the best people. And we have all these slots that sometimes are very hard to fill in some communities. Please, 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 we need somebody. Run. Isn't the best way to get the best outcome for our kids? So let me wrap up. a couple of last observations. Again, I'm not suggesting to you one district. I'm not suggesting to you what the answer is. I think being in Silicon Valley, we ought to be prepared to step back and say, what's the best system we can have to produce results for our kids? And charge ourselves with figuring out how to make that efficient and effective. Second, the fact that this is extremely hard to do, that it's going to cost money, that it's going to have to bring in people to help us figure it out, that shouldn't be the argument as to why we shouldn't do it. I spent this weekend giving some talks around Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. And you think about what the country had to figure out to create an environment to start to provide equal rights. This can get fixed. This isn't as difficult. Our kids need it. So, no, it's complicated, it's hard, it's going to cost money, does not allow us to walk away from what we need to do. And then the last thing is, I am struck by the number of companies that come here from around the world to learn from our companies here. All the time I get calls. The delegations come in, they want to meet with the community foundation, they're meeting at Cisco or at Facebook or at some, they're all around, they just want to learn. They want to figure out the secret of the valley. I've yet to hear about a delegation coming here from around the world or across the country saying, we want to replicate your school system. We want to replicate your results. We want to replicate how California is 49th place with Louisiana for 8th grade reading. We want to replicate how you're 47th with 44 other states in math. And I would say to you, something's wrong, fundamentally wrong, when we live in a community in which people routinely see us as leaders. And in the very essence of what makes us leaders, education, reading, mathematics, science, our school system does not reflect that excellence. And I want to suggest that a big part of it is we have created a system that in its very structure makes it too hard. It's not all of the problem. It won't solve everything. It won't fix everything. But I will know who to praise when it works. I will know who to blame when it doesn't. Thank you very much.
Okay, we've got the ball rolling here, and I want to thank Emmett for challenging us to take a look at this very complex issue. And at this time, a couple of things I just want to point out to you. On your tables, you'll see some cards. So you may be inspired to ask a question, something may pop into your mind during the conversation, either something you've heard Emmett or during the conversation. If you would please fill out the card. And we have two people, my colleague Amy Wong is over there, and my colleague Bob Nichols here, and they will pick up the cards, and then we will get them up to our panelists. So that way we'll be able to keep the forum going, and you can still get a chance to ask your questions. At this time, I'm going to introduce the panel. I think we've put together a very interesting panel, but I'm going to ask them to please come on up, and as I introduce them, we do have, the first person I'm going to introduce is from the Legislative Analyst Office, and we have Rachel Ellers, and Rachel can come on up, please. And on your table, there's an executive summary of the LAO report on this topic, and Rachel was the primary author of this, so she's going to kind of do a review of this report. You have that right there. And then I'm going to ask the rest of the panel to please come up and have a seat. Our county superintendent, Dr. Charles Weeks. So Chuck, thank you for being here today. We have superintendent from the Union School District, Dr. Jackie Borsch. Jackie, thank you for being here. And we have a board member from Cupertino, Josephine Lucy. Joe, thank you for being here. And I might mention that Joe is also on the member of the Santa Clara County Committee on School District Organization. So she's kind of wearing two hats on that. And Pearl Chang. Pearl is with the Foothill De Anza Community College Board of Trustees, and she's also an education program manager from United Way. She's also a former school board member and president of the Santa Clara County School Board Association for a couple of years when she was on the school board. So Pearl's worn several hats as well. And then finally, our moderator for today, we're very honored to have her here, is Barbara Marshman. She is the editor of the editorial pages, my favorite section of Mercury News, from the San Diego Mercury News, and we're very happy that she is here today, and she will be moderating this forum. So Rachel will kind of have an opportunity here to talk a little bit about the LAO report, and then I'll turn it over to Barbara at that time. So thank you all for being here today, and Rachel?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. This is a really interesting and timely topic you have chosen to discuss, and it's been a topic of great interest in Sacramento, too. For those of you who don't know who the LAO, or the Legislative Analyst's Office, is, we're the nonpartisan advisors to the legislature. We work primarily on budget the past few years, kind of year-round, but we're also supposed to help them with policy decisions. And so sometimes the work we do is kind of self-initiated topics we think might be of use to the legislature, and sometimes the work we do is at their request, and that's what happened with this report. I think in a time of limited resources, everybody's looking to do more with less and looking for efficiencies, and I think some of the legislators were interested in looking at this topic for that very reason. They asked us to look into the issue of school district consolidation, efficiencies, find recommendations we might have for them as state policymakers for ways to look at this issue, and if there are steps that the state ought to take from the state level. So most of what I'll be talking about is really kind of state level policy, whereas what you just heard was really more locally focused. But let me give you a sense of kind of the discussion that's going on in Sacramento. You've got the executive summary of the report here. I invite you to read the whole report at our website. It's about 20 pages. It's not too overwhelming. But so to give you a little context on California and what our district configuration looks like across the state, it's a really big variety. We've got about 3/4 of the districts in the state, almost 1,000 districts in the state of California. About 3/4 of them have 5,000 or fewer students. But that represents only 15% of the students in the state. Okay? So we've got plenty of small districts serving few students. At the other extreme, we've got 15 districts in the state that have 40,000 or more students, and that represents 1/4 of all students in the state. So we've got a really big variety. And then we've got Los Angeles Unified, that's 10% right there. Okay, so a big variety. We have half as many districts now as we did about 50 years ago, and that's partly because the state in the 60s took a concentrated effort to reduce the number of school districts we had. The state provided fiscal incentives or bonuses for districts that chose to consolidate and come together. So we've got a picture in the report. You can see kind of the numbers drop off dramatically. There were big increase in unifications in the 60s. Then once the state stopped providing those fiscal incentives, the number of consolidations really dropped off. It's kind of in the neighborhood of 2 to 5 a year now. So different. Part of that is that the state really takes kind of a hands-off approach to district configuration in the state of California. You can read about other states where the state government has taken a much more proactive approach. In the state of Maine, a year or two ago, they passed a mandate that every district had to be of a certain size and forcing consolidations. California hasn't taken that approach. We've really left it up to local control. Consolidations have to be initiated at the local level. The school boards have to vote to proceed with the consolidation. In some cases, school board members have to vote themselves out of a job. So you can think about what that means. And then the local electorate has to approve it too. So it really has been a locally determined decision in the state of California. So as we took on this report, we were really looking at the two very divergent, very competing perspectives on consolidation. We may have some of those divergent perspectives in the room right here, right now. You've just heard the pro-consolidation side of things, which really, those advocates really believe that small districts are inefficient, that we could get savings from consolidating. Some really believe that it's bad for students, that the educational program isn't as enriched in some of the small school districts. On the flip side, you've got folks who say, no, even if a district is small, they're finding ways to generate economies of scale. They're finding ways to be really efficient. They've got one person doing 3 different jobs. They're being really efficient. We wouldn't get any savings if we consolidated. And actually, it's better for students because they get this individual attention. There's more community input. There's more community involvement in a smaller district. And smaller really is better. We wouldn't gain anything by consolidating. So what we took a look at with this report was kind of evaluating the merits of those two arguments. We did a lot of interviews, we did site visits, we reviewed research on the topic, and we really dug into student achievement data in California, expenditure data by district, and revenue data by district to see, does size matter? So what did we find? We had 5 primary findings in the report. First one was, small districts do find ways to economize, so we found some merit to this argument that they are finding ways to generate efficiencies. They do find ways to economize, but they still face fiscal and personnel challenges. So we found that this idea that each small district is an island unto itself, replicating every single function that every other district is doing, is really not true. There is a lot of sharing going on across the state, a lot of consortia, both on the administrative side, where there are districts that share superintendents, share principals, share payroll systems, share computer systems, share substitute pools, but also on the instructional side, there are districts that share librarians, that share professional development, that work through their county offices of education. So even if the district itself has a different label on it, a different name, it's really working together with other districts and other entities to not only save money, but offer a broader educational program. So we found that that really is true. But we did, in looking at expenditure data, find that small districts spend notably more on overhead compared to instructional costs. And this was particularly true for the very small districts, 100 or fewer students, of which that's about 10% of districts in the state have 100 or fewer students. And I think you've only got one here in Santa Clara that's that small. So those very small districts were spending a lot more on things like maintenance, classified staff, and a lot less on things like teachers and administrators compared to larger districts. And you can understand why. When you don't have the economies of scale, you're having to put more into that. So that was a concern that we saw. Our second major finding had to do with student performance. We found that district size does have some effect on student performance, but it's pretty small. Along with that, we found that very small school districts are really hard to monitor. So this was really consistent with the academic research, which shows that mid-sized districts of about 2,000 to 10,000 students tend to do best. They do better than the very large districts, and they also do better than the smaller districts. But the differences aren't huge. So in our evaluation and look at the data, it was only 6 API points difference on average, between these kind of mid-sized districts and the smaller districts. So somewhat better, but nothing to run around screaming about. The concern, though, is with these very small districts, and looking at it, we found it's really hard to hold them accountable and to know how students are doing in those small districts because the data doesn't yield statistically valid results. The group is so small that if 5 kids had a cold one day, it could throw off your results. And that's particularly true for the subgroups of students, English learners, special ed students, low-income students. In these smaller districts, those subpopulations are so small that in some cases it's not even reported, or it's reported with an asterisk, and they aren't held to the same standards through our federal and state accountability systems. These small districts aren't, because we can't draw conclusions from the data. So that's a real concern. How does the state know how students are doing there? How do local communities know how students are doing there if the data isn't yielding results that we can draw conclusions from? Our third major finding had to do with fiscal resources. And this was actually one of the most shocking findings for me working on the report. I started sending emails to my colleagues. Oh my God, do you know what I just found? That small school districts have substantial funding advantages over larger districts. And this is, again, particularly true for those very small districts, 100 students or fewer. On average, they receive twice as much funding per pupil as the larger districts. So these data are a few years old. We've had budget cuts since then, but from 2008-9, districts with 100 or fewer students got on average $18,000 per pupil. Larger districts about $9,000 per pupil. So, why is this? Well, the state provides some additional categorical program funding for small districts. Some of the smaller districts are basic aid. Districts with only one school, this is another interesting fact, roughly 230 districts in the state have only one school in them. So a lot of these single school districts qualify for a special grant called Necessary Small School Funding. I don't think any in Santa Clara get the Necessary Small School Funding, but this was kind of originally intended for geographically isolated schools. That, it's the only place up on the mountaintop, so it's necessary. But because of the way the statute's written, many school districts that have only one school in it automatically get it, even if there's another district 5 miles down the road. So this is another piece of that. Our fourth major finding was that disincentives keep school districts from consolidating. So what are these disincentives? Well, I just told you one of them, didn't I? You're getting a whole bunch of extra money because you're small. Why would you want to consolidate with another district if that means you would lose that fiscal advantage? So that was one of the biggest fiscal disadvantages, but we've got a whole list in the report. There's potential of higher staffing costs if you're merging with a district that has a higher salary schedule. Your revenue limit, your kind of per pupil money, if your rate is higher than the other one and they average them, you might lose some money that way. If you've got a parcel tax, if you've got excess tax if you're a basic aid district, there are lots of kind of fiscal implications of consolidating. But beyond those disincentives, there are also statutory barriers that the state has put in place. We've got protections for classified staff, where if 2 districts choose to merge together, they're not allowed to lay off any classified staff for 2 years or drop their salaries. So if one of the reasons you're consolidating is to get efficiencies and you've got 2 cafeteria managers and now you only need 1, well, our state law prohibits you from reducing that, either of their salaries or laying either of them off for 2 years. So there's a barrier there too. And then all the local considerations, which I know all of you are deeply steeped in. Communities really like their districts, their small districts, their sense of identity, there's fear that schools will close. So that's another big barrier. And then of course the school board member issue that I mentioned, that our process depends on school board members voting themselves out of jobs in some cases, which may be difficult for some. So then our fifth major finding had to do with very small schools, which I don't think there are any in Santa Clara, but we raised some of these same concerns about individual schools. That may be too small, what kind of education is a high schooler getting in a school with 3 students, the amount of extra money the state is spending for these very small schools, and what kind of educational program, how accountable can we really keep them? So again, some of those same considerations at the very small school, not just the very small district. So what conclusions did we draw? What were our recommendations to our bosses, the legislators, on the basis of this? Well, as you can probably glean, our takeaway didn't have substantial compelling evidence that the state ought to change its longstanding policy, get in there, start forcing districts to consolidate, because the problem didn't seem so large, at least for kind of moderate-sized districts, setting aside this issue of 100 or smaller, which we did find concerning. But we didn't see compelling enough evidence for the state to start taking a dramatically different top-down approach. We also didn't find evidence that in this time of fiscal resources, providing fiscal incentives for districts to come together, giving more money for districts that choose to come together, was really merited. But nor do we think the state should continue to have disincentives for districts to come together. So we have some recommendations on removing some of those disincentives. Some of it on the fiscal side, removing some of the additional money that districts are getting just to be small or just to have 1 school in them. Why should a community that chooses to have multiple schools in it not get those additional funding when a district that chooses just to have 1 gets additional money? There didn't seem any rationale for that. So removing some of those fiscal incentives to be small, removing some of these statutory barriers that I mentioned, protections for classified staff, and another one related to environmental quality reviews, kind of these technical steps that that districts have to go through to consolidate. And we also did have some recommendations on the very small districts. That's where we thought the state maybe would want to take a more active role because there were enough concerns about accountability and the cost for the state. So right now, the minimum size for a district is 6 students for an elementary district and 11 students for a unified or high school district. So we recommended increasing that to at least 100. It could be certainly much higher, but 100 would take care of 10% of districts in the state. So that right there is a political hurdle enough. And then we also had some recommendations again on the very small schools. The state, there is no minimum size for school right now, so the state might want to think about a minimum size for school and some of the other accountability and fiscal sides on the school. So again, these are statewide recommendations. We are recommending it really stay a local decision, but trying to get the state incentives and disincentives and structures in place that locals might feel more empowered to make more effective decisions for their own communities. Thanks.
Thank you. We thought we'd start with Chuck to talk a little bit about the process and how the county board would wrap into that, and I think he has some slides.
Okay, I wanted to put this in local context. Rachel did a great job of talking about the statewide issues. I have a couple slides here to deal with the local issues. So first slide, you see we've crossed out 32 because we've already resolved it. Are 32 too many? The answer is yes. There are only 31. 2 years ago, Montebello lapsed. They had 9 students. They voted to lapse, so those properties were acquired by Cupertino, Los Gatos, Saratoga High School District, and one other district, Los Gatos, I think it was, or Saratoga, not in Saratoga. So we have 31 now. And you know, this is a big issue in Santa Clara County. The grand jury report of 2009-10 talked about consolidation. They had their plan for consolidation that really said that there should be 4 elementary middle school districts put into 2 union districts on the west side, and that would improve efficiencies and cost savings. And then the grand jury this last year in 10-11 said that Luther Burbank should consider consolidating with another district, or at least take advantage of joint powers authority to provide services at lower cost. So let me first tell you how the process works, because we haven't covered that. And I want to thank Suzanne Carrick and Larry Sloniker for putting this together. Go on the next slide. I think that worked real well. Next slide. So this is the process. There are 3 ways to enter the process on the left-hand side. By petition signed by 25% of the electorate, by resolution passed by a majority of the board members of an affected school district, or from a plan from the County Committee on School District Organization. Whatever method you enter it goes to the county committee for a recommendation. By the way, the county committee is a group that is elected by represented board members from every district in the county. They're not all board members on the county committee, but they're elected by board members in the county. Then it goes to the State Board of Education for approval. Then it goes to a local electorate for approval, so it has to be voted upon. And the local county committee can fast track that process if there's no disagreement on it. Finally, then districts would unify. That's the unifying process. The next process we have on the next slide is a process for merging school districts. Again, it starts the same way, but it requires only a 10% signature of the, 25% of those in the affected area, or 10% of the entire district. And then a resolution passed by the affected districts, or a plan from the county committee. It goes to the county committee for decision, then a local election for approval, and then the districts get to merge. That process is much easier and more doable. So there are 3 thresholds that I considered when looking at this. 1 is, will it improve student learning? 2, will it improve community involvement in our schools? Or 3, will it save money? Those are the 3 reasons I think you want to consider. So let's take a look at the first one. Will it improve student learning in Santa Clara County? Next slide. This is a scattergram of API growth in the last year over size of district. You see the line we drew, which is a negative correlation line, but it's not even a very strong line. You can see that scattergram is indeed scattered, showing that some of our smaller districts have high growth, some of our larger districts have high growth, some of our larger districts have lower growth, some of our smaller districts have low growth. So it doesn't seem to have a direct correlation between size of district and achievement. Let's take a look at improved community involvement. Well, in Santa Clara County, there are 13 cities. So, and that's how most districts are organized around the state, is around some city or area. This area is unique in that it was formed around orchards, I'm understanding. And so this, when you talk about a community identity, district identity, or community participation, it makes it much easier when people feel they're part of another organization like a city or some other geographic boundary. Don't use that one yet. Did I tell you save slide? Okay, never mind. Does it save money in this area? Well, interestingly, that's the next slide we have. You can see on this slide, this was the one out of Rachel's report. Next slide. So you can see, interesting, Rachel, you have 2 mid-sized groups in this, you know that? So it's a small mid-size and a larger mid-size. But basically...
There was a lot of debate over what name to call those.
Okay.
Days of talking about it.
Well, anyway, you can see that. Now let's take a look at this county. Pull up the next slide in red, and then you can flip back and forth once for me. Go backwards, then go forward. Go backwards, then go forward. One more time, backwards, and then forward. So you can see that we have very few smalls. We don't look like the state here. As a matter of fact, we only have 1 very small. That's Lakeside. We only have 3 smalls, making a total of 4 direct service school districts. Whereas you can see, if you go back to the blue one, that's 400 school districts in the state of California, only 4 here. Then you go to mid-sized. That's more like the state looks. We have 300, we have 10, there are 300 in the state. Then the smaller mid-sized, but we really have many more large districts than the state on average. So indeed, if you take a look at Santa Clara County, we have a significant number of our districts that are larger than average for the state of California. 40% of California schools are under 1K, we only have 13%. So you can see our distribution is very different. Now let's take a look at how we spend our money. In the state of California, this is the chart that Rachel came up with. Next slide. Study that for just a second. It shows the way the school districts spend their money. It starts with services, books and supplies, benefits, classified staff, certificated staff. It's what Rachel said in her talk, that the very small spend less on teachers and administrators. That's the very bottom of that bar chart. Now let's go to the Santa Clara County picture. You see, we don't have some of them. We don't have the very smalls. But you can see there is virtually no difference in distribution of expenditure between districts in this county. Almost completely flat across the board. So suggesting that size matters when it comes to how we spend our money in Santa Clara County is probably not accurate. So the conclusion is that as you know, the legislative analyst report said it really wasn't worth pursuing, except possibly for the extremely smalls. So I think we could draw that same conclusion in Santa Clara County. It probably isn't worth pursuing for those 3 reasons. It's not going to save a lot of money, it's not going to improve achievement, and it really won't create communities of interest unless we go around the 13 cities in this county. So when Emmett opened up, he said he doesn't think consolidation will solve every problem. I would agree. He said he was looking for one best system, and that we have to improve the things that we don't achieve well at, and I think he's right. There is more we can do, but I'm not sure that the size of the district is the one variable that will make the difference that we're seeking. And I just want to end by saying that I think that the system that we have is built around community involvement and a democracy. And democracy by its very nature is messy, but that's the system that we're working with. Thank you.
We have I think, kind of two sides here of how we're going to go. And I thought it might be useful for the audience to know where others stand on the continuum, just as a baseline. Could you, and we'll obviously flesh this out as we go along, but I'd like to know, I'll ask first, who pretty much agrees with Emmett that this is a major thing that we need to deal with. I'll ask who agrees with Chuck that at least in this county, probably not worth pursuing, and then we'll see who's left in the middle. So who is with Emmett on this? No. Well, let's ask the panel first.
I'm probably somewhere in the middle, but I think Emmett has raised some very provocative points for us all to consider. And I actually would throw into the conversation what I think we're also looking at through the governor's proposed budget, such things as the weighted student formula, as well as the core standards, Common Core. And so I think that allows us then to drill down towards the achievement issues that Emmett did raise, and perhaps even the redistricting aspect being part of that same conversation. So I actually broadened the conversation a little bit more than just the the redistricting conversation today.
Well, so I spent some time preparing for this forum before I came, and I actually asked myself, why would you consolidate? What outcomes would you want to have, and why would you pursue consolidation? And I had two that Chuck had. One, the only reason it makes sense to do it is if you really believe you're going to have stronger academic outcomes for students. And the only other reason, I think, is if you think you're going to have cost savings, which you can then use to help have better academic outcomes for students. I like the community involvement one. I hadn't really thought about that, but I think that's important as well. And I think you need to look at it each on a case-by-case basis. I don't think you can make a generalization that consolidating districts or unifying districts is automatically going to save you money or give you better outcomes. And so I think if you really want to have the conversation, you have to sit down and look at each merger consolidation on a case-by-case basis to decide why you think you're going to have better outcomes for students and if you really are going to save money or not. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. When the grand jury report came out, one of the recommendations was that the Sunnyvale School District, the Cupertino Union School District, and the Fremont Union High School District should merge because it would save a lot of money. And I think most people think that when you take District A and District B and you merge them together and have District AB, that the funding you have is District A plus District B. And that's just not true. And that's the real fundamental piece. You have to sit back and look at what happens to your funding when you merge based on the state funding laws. So for example, you have to look at whether you're a basic aid district or a revenue limit district. And if the districts merging are different, your funding changes. I'll be quick.
Okay, I could check to go through some of
Yep.
that.
I think you have to look at whether your district has, any of the districts have bonds or parcel taxes. Because the law is very unclear about when you merge, whether those parcel taxes merge with you or whether you lose that parcel tax funding. The law is more clear about bonds. If you've issued bonds, the community is obligated to repay them. But if you have authority from your community to issue bonds and you have yet to issue them, you no longer have authority to issue those bonds. So you have to go back to your new electorate to finish your bond programs. And the last thing I think you have to look at is your union contracts, your salary schedules, and your retirement benefits. You have to merge those. And if districts have divided their individual pies in different ways, you have to consolidate that. So while you might see some consolidation and savings from merging administrative costs, you have to balance that against all of the other costs, which quite frankly, in some cases, you lose money. So,
Thank you, Jackie. You've had some unusual experience with this. Why don't you talk just a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know that it was unusual, but I do have a historical perspective because I was working in the Moreland School District when there was the unification effort. And of course, depending on which district you were in, some folks called it a unification effort and some folks called it a takeover. So one of the things that I think I'd like to bring out about that, it was an unsuccessful consolidation attempt from the districts in the west side of the Bay Area here. It reminds me of an analogy when we asked the question, are 31 school districts too many for Santa Clara County? The analogy that comes to my mind, I know the farming one came to Emmett's, but the one that I think of is Goldilocks. You know, if you looked at the charts that Chuck showed about the mid-sized districts, just like, you know, the Bears, one size possibly is too small, another size is too big, but you know what, there are sizes that are just right. And I think that the consolidation effort that happened in the late 90s, or attempt rather, showed that the folks that were involved in the districts who were impacted by that decision really felt that the sizes of their districts were just right. Interestingly enough, there was a lot of contention around who was going to make that decision, because although it should be the local communities who are impacted that get to vote, when it actually came to the decision made by the appellate court, the only folks who were able to vote on whether or not Moreland could unify with Campbell Union High School District and the other elementary districts, the court decided that only the folks in the Moreland community would be able to vote. So the other folks who were also impacted by the decision, the Campbell Union High School District folks who weren't in Moreland, they were not allowed to vote. And yet, even with that, the local community voted that they wanted to stay within their own community boundaries. So the unification effort was defeated. So I think that historically speaking, we can see that when given an opportunity to voice what folks really, what matters most to folks. Is it size, or is it the district's achievement record, their sense of community input, and even their belief in the funding levels that are adequate or not for their children? I think you can see that historically unification in this area was not successful.
As a follow-up question, we've been talking about unification generally, but when I came here from Pennsylvania, where, by the way, I, for first grade, attended a one-room schoolhouse, very like this, with similar restroom facilities. There were 6 of us in the first grade. When I came here, I was stunned to see that there were K-8 school districts and high school districts. And size aside, obviously there are a lot of considerations with the size. Has anyone studied, does anyone know if there's a benefit to aligning grade schools with high schools so that you have more of the accountability that Emmett talked about?
Well, in education, there's studies on everything. There's actually more publications in education than any other field, including medicine. And you wonder why. It's because we have more advanced degrees than any other field. More people are working. So we have master's theses, we have doctoral dissertations, and yes, it's been studied ad infinitum. And guess what? There is no effect of unification or separate. In fact, I worked in a unified district for about 20 years. And we still have problems getting our high school to follow what our middle school had been teaching so that they would teach the kids what they. So unification is not a solution, it is an opportunity. And it can work if led properly, but it's not a panacea for making sure that there's a continuous growth across grade levels.
Any of you in the K-12 districts experience problems with the high schools trying to coordinate?
I'm just going to give you 2 examples. Palo Alto Unified, and then Sunnyvale, Cupertino, and Fremont Union High School District. Palo Alto Unified is a K-12 district. I think they do a great job. They have great educational outcomes for their students, and I think the parents in that community like what they have. In our community, in the Cupertino Union School District, and the Sunnyvale Elementary District, and the Fremont Union High School District, during the last high school election, one of the candidates brought up unification as a part of the grand jury report, and we should unify and save money, and there was a lot of backlash.
In a unified district, you can have some fabulous alignment, and you can have great consolidation of programs, or not, really and truly just depending on the leadership, the relationships, the historical context. Likewise, in elementary districts that feed into a high school, some of us, I think, have fabulous relationships with our colleagues in the high school district. Our parents are very much involved in making sure that there's that alignment. We ensure that our curriculum materials, if you teach Algebra 1 at the elementary, it's the same course, same outcomes, same entrance exams. So it really does depend, I think, on the people involved, the leadership, and the historical context of the district.
And if I might too, Barbara, I also, as you heard in my introduction, I do work in the nonprofit sector. So I come at this topic not only as a parent, as many of you in this room, and so local control and the emotional piece of having good representation for my education of the community is important to me. I also come to this topic as a trustee at the elementary as well as the higher ed arena. And again, local control is important also to ensuring solid outcomes for the students that we serve. But then as you know, from the nonprofit sector, I definitely do see that there are issues of articulation, coordination, and ensuring solid outcomes between partnerships, as Jeff even mentioned too. It does come down to the relationships that you build. And certainly with the 31 districts, that does make it difficult at times for programs and nonprofit coordinators that are running programs in the county to really understand what some of those liaisons and partnerships need to be, but they're learning. But certainly, does that then still help us solve some of the issues that we face? And again, I come back to where Emmett did describe some of the key challenges that we face in this county. And with that nonprofit hat on, that's where I do see the biggest urgency into looking at a range of options for us perhaps to be dialoguing about. Maybe it's not consolidation or mergers in particular, but perhaps getting behind the weighted student formula as potentially an option for us in the county to help serve some of our greatest needs students better. Maybe it is looking at different sectors of our county to see if there are different ways to align. Maybe it's not a merger or unification perhaps, but it is perhaps a way to redraw some particular zones that would serve our children better. But I think we still need a conversation to continue to see what we can do to help some of the districts.
Is there any kind of forum for school districts to get together and talk about that kind of thing? I don't think it really happens at the county board level, or does it?
Well, actually, at the county office, we have job-like meetings of every major leadership role in the districts. And very frankly, I gotta let you know, my job as county superintendent would be a lot easier if there were fewer districts. 31 is tough. I visit schools on a regular basis. I visit every district, and there'd be a lot less districts to visit, and there'd be a lot less things to send out to invite people to meetings, and a lot less people to make decisions with. But it may not be what the community wants. So, I think that we have job-like meetings for curriculum leaders. We have job-like meetings for assistant super for HR, assistant super for business, superintendents. So we have them across each month, across all those decision makers, so that we can share resources and share support for one another on a regular basis.
Has anyone taken up the issue of nonprofit participation of foundations, of the difficulty of getting someone engaged in this county?
Well, I wanted to speak to something different than that, if I could. So, I'm all for community participation. I run an institution called the Community Foundation. I'm for involvement. But I'm also for trying to have parents understand what the real deal is involving their kids. So there's survey after survey that you can do of parents, asking them, rate your school. And they consistently rated the highest school. They like their teacher. And yet on the API scores, the school is failing. Right? So the fact that the parent wants it the way it is not by itself evidence that that's the best way to do it. And so as leaders, not as followers, as leaders, we have an obligation that they understand what's happening to their kids. Not as they may think it happens, but as it actually happens. And so when the county superintendent says it would be easier to do his job, that's a big statement. That's not I just have to travel a little bit more. If we're going to compare data to the state, I'd love it if we said our state was #1. So it's great to say over the state and compare it to the state, but we want to be #1.
We are.
We're #1. Our county's #1.
On a lot of issues, we're very close.
Okay, all right. I don't see that with the data of performance that we see. I don't see the accountability with the number of board members we have. I don't see it. I don't see it in the parent groups that I talk to. As a newcomer here that had to try to navigate finding a place for my daughter to go to school, it was incredibly complicated and difficult to figure out the entire system, right? And so when you say it's a scatter shot of schools that we can't find the correlation, I don't disagree with that data. But then that suggests to me we aren't being as effective in giving education, and that we have too many units that we have to work through. This isn't an argument for one. It's not an argument that it ought to be unification. It's not an argument for consolidation. But certainly are those of you who are saying you think this is the best we can do? 31, the way it's set up, because the community likes it that way historically, this is the best we can do. Because if it's not, then let's talk about what we ought to be doing. And not the sense that I get, well, you know, we sort of like it like this. Because I don't really think that when I talk to parents, they like it. When I tell people it's 31 districts, they go, oh my God. And that's not what I'm getting from the people who I would want to be leaders of that.
Chuck and then Jeff.
Yeah.
Well, I think that, you know, one of the things that, on one side we're talking about consolidations and unifications, on the other side of the argument for creating quality education is charters, which is the antithesis of unification. It's the antithesis of districts. And so instead of navigating 11 districts to figure things out, at some point you're going to be navigating 300 or 400 charter schools to figure out where your child goes to school. So I mean, those are two contradictory kind of conversations that we really should have.
But it's
Shouldn't
out of
there
the
be some
frustration,
coordination to
Chuck.
make it easier for the consumer? And in fact, in this area, you know, that there are actually great tools, better than in most areas, being able to go online and find out if you live here, here's the school and district you can go to, or there are all these charters in your area that you can go to, all online.
Chuck,
So
the
it's-
charters are out of the frustration of the system.
The charters are a way of innovating and trying to improve it. No one in this room that's an educator or a board member would say we're the best we can be. No one would say that, because we're about continuous improvement and improvement. I think that many of us are saying barking up the consolidation tree may not be the right tree. If charters are a tree, then it's the opposite tree. So really, I mean, we have to think about what we think matters. And if we think, you know, separate units and improving school by school is what matters, then we look at a charter school approach. If we think that pulling people together and trying to move together as a larger group is the way, then we look at consolidation. Those are two antithetical processes.
You know, one of the things that I think we're forgetting here really is who are the we? You know, Emmett, you said you believe that the parents don't know, or you believe that the parents are not satisfied. I think that when you look at the research about what parents think about their schools, that's the we need to take a look at. I know in many of the districts that, you know, my district, Union School District, if you look at any of the parent survey results, you'll see that our parents are very, very satisfied with their student performance results, with the input they have into our processes. And I would guess if you asked them if they wanted to unify or consolidate, they probably would not choose to do that, because quite frankly, they are local control. They are very pleased with the student results. So I'm not sure that it's really true to be saying that, you know, the parents don't know. I think there are many educated and very informed parents in our communities, and I think many of them are in fact very, very pleased with the results that their local schools are delivering. So, you know, I do think that you need to take into consideration the opinion of the people who are going to be most impacted by the decision about unification or consolidation.
Jen, you just taking your school as an example, the parents are all happy. Do you track your kids to see how many graduate from high school? Are you above average in graduation, lower?
Yes, we're above average. We're, you know, all of our schools, with the exception of one that's almost there, above 900. We've done phenomenal growth in the last 5 years for all of our students. We've closed the achievement gap. As a matter of fact, one of our schools is being recognized at the San Jose 2020 next week for the progress it's made. So, you know, we have student performance results that are evidence of why the parents are happy. And I think in many, many of our school districts throughout the county, that's the case. To make the case that consolidation is going to be the factor that's going to close the achievement gap, I think is really going down the wrong path. You know, NASA was able to defy the laws of gravity by landing a man on the moon, but it took an awful lot of fuel power and a really powerful rocket ship to do it. We're not going to be able to do that same defining of the impact of poverty and socioeconomics on our students without something that's going to be related to funding. So it seems like we've got some mixed metaphors going on here between funding, between farming, between Goldilocks. You know, I think there's a lot of complex issues that we need to be looking at.
Yeah, we really have broken a lot of ground here on metaphors. I want to, Joe, do you have something?
No.
Somebody from the audience brought up the rocket ship charter and the question of whether, when we have 20 more charter schools, how does that affect this whole movement? I mean, might it encourage consolidation in some areas because people are moving further away from small schools? Want me to pick somebody?
Actually, as I said before, I think that the more charters we have that are going after individual areas, the more it makes districts less important. And so I think the new parent population is going to be saying, what school do I want to go to? Not, where do the kids who live in this neighborhood go to school? And I think that's the issue with the proliferation of charters. It's going to change the way public education does its business because you won't have a catchment anymore, I think. I think districts, I predict, within my lifetime, school districts will be a thing of the past. I think the way we've done business for nearly 100 years is going to change because it's going to be a consumer-driven model.
You're not going to live too long, Chuck.
After that statement, he says, I'm not living very long, okay. But I really think it's something we need to think about. I think, you know, as we get into more of a consumer-oriented environment, that telling people, here's where your kid's going to go to school, isn't going to be as powerful as it used to be. So just, that's my thoughts.
Question here that I think we'll start with Emmett. It's about, and it's from Esau Herrera. I'm not sure where Esau is. Esau is observing that back when school boards were mostly white males, nobody talked about unification that much. I'm not sure that's true because in the 60s or 70s is when a lot of unification did happen. But his broader point is, if we were to unify more districts and reduce numbers of board members, what does that do to participation in primarily minority districts, the new participation of Latino and Vietnamese board members? Would anyone like to?
I certainly couldn't tell you. I would suspect that it may lower it, but the demographic changes may mean it may be a higher percentage. I can't speculate on it. I do want to follow up on what Chuck said, though, because I do think one of the motivations for the charter are the results, the academic performance results that I cited, and people are frustrated with saying that we're not producing quality results, and so that is fueling the charter. Because they believe, rightly or wrongly, perception or reality, that their kids will get better results. Right? And that will only get fueled to the extent that we keep what I believe is a Byzantine structure. So if Chuck's right, it ends up that way anyway. It gets broken up because people aren't satisfied with the way it is. They aren't satisfied with the results. And so part of this is about, again, parents and people trying to get good results. If you're happy with the results you have, you're happy. But it is failing, the statistics for Santa Clara County, we're failing most kids. That's the data that I cited in terms of graduates being prepared for UC schools. Okay, well then, I can show you the report. I didn't create it.
I did.
But, okay. The data's wrong that I cited, Chuck?
I'll explain it to you.
Please.
The truth of the
I
matter.
don't know what happens with the numbers in terms and how they get voted on. I simply can't speculate. I'm not saying.
Are you concerned with that?
I'm more concerned with whether or not kids have accountable leadership as to how many people of different races or backgrounds are among 126 board members. That's a secondary concern to whether or not we have accountable leadership for results.
Great.
For me.
Chuck, why don't you,
I can address your question just a little bit, Esau. The California School Boards Association actually did a study that looked at ethnic diversity in school board members and trying to decide whether the leadership in the association matched the breakup, the demographically represented school board members. And one of the outcomes of that study was that students' demographics are concentrated in certain areas, and school board members that reflect the demographics of their community is typically concentrated in certain areas. And if you merge those districts together, then yes, you will have fewer representatives of certain demographics. So the answer to your question is yes. And I can get you the study. You've probably seen the study.
I have it, thank you.
Chuck, want to tell us about your statistics?
Well, just one other thing, and that is that one of the things to consider is that the proliferation of charters has caused another phenomenon in California schools, and that's the resegregation of schools. And so that's an issue that we also must be concerned about, making sure that our school boards are not only represented, but our schools have a representative of students that look like the community. So, but on the issue of the statistics you quoted, when you look at the data in Santa Clara County, you're overwhelmed by a couple of findings. Number one, we have some of the highest performing students and schools and districts in the state. In addition, when you dig a little deeper, you find that Latino youth and African American youth score significantly worse than the rest of the state of California. So that's the real challenge for Santa Clara County schools, and we've been saying this for several years now. That's the statistics you quoted about dropout rate, about preparation for college. Now, the interesting thing about A to G requirements and preparation is we have the largest unified district in the state that has implemented required A to G courses for all students for the longest length of time. That's San Jose Unified. We now have the largest high school district in the state that has made that the default curriculum for kids. But the reality of A to G is it's the coursework to go into the CSU and the UC system. We have 54% of our students in this county that are ready for that at the end of graduation. Unfortunately, this year, only 25% of the kids in the state of California had space in the CSU or UC. So we're indeed producing twice as many kids as there are spaces right now. That's one of our dilemmas. Certainly, we should be producing 100% of our kids that are ready for the CSU and UC. It would mean us as adults need to do a greater investment in the higher education system in the state, like our grandparents and our parents did, to make sure there are spaces for our kids. That's the real travesty in this state. It's not about consolidation, it's about investment.
What were the numbers I cited then? I mean, I didn't hear that they were the wrong numbers.
You interpreted them as a failure.
You added another number, but they were the same numbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just say you
Oh,
interpreted them.
I just want to be in agreement that they were the same numbers. So you said that I didn't have the numbers right, they were the wrong statistics, and in fact, you cited the very same stats.
No, you concluded it was a failing system, and I just said that was.
I conclude I'm not excited about 58%.
I hear you.
I mean,
I'm not jumping up going, boy, aren't we great? 58%. 54. Boy, we're doing it. I have a higher expectation of what we ought to want to deliver for our kids.
So do we.
I just want to be clear.
thank you. Let me, just drilling down a little bit more on the numbers. Santa Clara County is at the high end for California. For most variables, but not for, I mean, that seems to make the disparity seem even worse.
Well, as a good example, the top 5 performing elementary schools in the state of California, 3 of them are here. And the number of districts that are above 800 significantly blows away the state in that year. That's the statewide target for API. So yeah, there's a lot of high-performing schools. And as I said, though, that's not the major educational issue in Santa Clara County.
Right.
The major educational issue is our inability to educate all Latino and African American youth to the same high levels as our white and Asian American students. That's our challenge.
I agree. I'm not saying it's not a challenge, Joe.
So is there any, let me ask the audience quickly, how many of you are interested in pursuing some sort of consolidation? How many of you have become sympathetic to the idea of consolidating to a degree? I see one hand over there. Okay,
I
so
would rephrase it.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in feasibility studies than in presumptions of consolidation, if we're gonna move in that direction at all. It's purely feasibility at this point. Run the numbers, run the scenarios, see what's really true beyond opinion or speculation or projection.
does everybody agree that that's a good thing to do?
I mean, I think that's
I
exactly
mean,
right.
I've read through.
You have to look at each situation on an individual basis to see whether you really save money or not.
And saving money being part of it, but improving achievement would be the other part.
And I will say there are counties in the state who are doing that right now. I know El Dorado County, for example, is looking, has a lot of small districts. Siskiyou County's undertaking it too. Lots of different combinations. What if we did it this way? What if we did it this way? What if we did it this way before it gets put to voters? Before, you know, just kind of looking at in a non-threatening way. Let's see what the situations are before we start proposing things.
And then just as a starting point, I would say that read this report by the LAO. It's a very easy read. I would say that we should come out in favor of the recommendations that Rachel outlined. That's just a very simple starting point. And then I think get into the scenarios on our other districts.
You said something that I just really had to respond to. You know, I said you have to look at it to see if you save money. And you said, well, yeah, but it's really about student achievement. And I will tell you, and I think every school board member in this room will tell you, that you can't raise student achievement when you're losing money. So while money is not sufficient, it's necessary. And I think that's a phrase we all need to remember. Money is necessary. It's not sufficient, it's not the only thing, but it is necessary.
I'd like to do something quick, Jackie.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we are very clear with who the "we" is going to be found in this. Again, just, you know, to remind everybody that consolidation or unification really is subject to the law, and it has to be, you know, something that the local districts want to do. And I think every single local school board and every single local district community needs to be the ones that, you know, wrestle with the decision of whether or not they believe that they have a compelling need to do this. So just want to make sure that we're, you know, mindful of, we can say whatever we want to say, but it's not anyone who's sitting up here's decision. Local control is what it is, local control.
In the states that have encouraged or forced consolidations in various ways, has anyone looked at the difference that's made? I know there was a wave of it in the 50s, 60s, 70s. There seems to be a new wave now. And here comes Jeff.
Yes, that's been studied. In fact, if consolidation worked, our schools would be higher achieving now. Our unified districts would be higher achieving than our elementary and high school districts, but they're not. Because there was a wave of unifications in the 50s and the 60s. As I said, I worked in a district that was unified in the late 60s. And the residue from the unification was still evident in the 70s when I was working there. The high school district was the high school was still very separate from the elementaries. And so unification is not a powerful variable. When you talk about effect size, which is what researchers use, the effect size of consolidation unification is very, very, very small. There are many more things we could invest our time in that would have more impact on student learning and even on saving money than looking at going through the last unification I went through was a 20-year process, and then it was defeated. And so going through that, spending that amount of time and money to get no impact, because one, it didn't happen, and two, because even the unification wouldn't have changed student learning very much, is not where we should be spending our time, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. I'm told that we should wrap up. One of our questions, actually a comment from the audience, is Mountain View Wisman was one of the last consolidations in the county. It took over 40 years, and it was within the same city and community. So it's an uphill fight, probably, but I'm really glad that people are interested in looking at it. It just seems like we can all look around and say, if we were starting today to form school districts, this is probably not the way we do it. We might do it by city, we might do, and I think it's great that you're all talking about it. Thank you, our panel was wonderful, energetic.